All right, welcome everybody to episode 5 of Ty's Training Talking with My Dad. This is the week of January 20th, 2025. I'm Tyler Andrews, and here, as always, with my wonderful co-host and father, Tim Andrews, aka Mr. C, for another look at training and life ahead of Project Himalaya. Mr. C, how are you doing?
Happy to be here as always. So let's start with the numbers. Give us a quick summary of the totals from last week.
Yeah, so this week was kind of interesting. We had my first of these little recovery blocks, is what I call them, which we'll talk about later. So I had 3 really low days, but still good volume overall. I had about 100 kilometers, 12,300 meters of climbing, and over 21 hours of training time. So still a good week.
Yeah, I could use some colorful language. Holy moly, I'll say instead. So you had days where you weren't even training that hard and you still did 12,314 meters. That almost sounds like the most you've done in a single week. Am I right about that? It's pretty close.
It's probably the biggest week so far this year, for sure. But I think it'll become the new normal.
Okay. And then give us a quick summary of the workouts and then I'll start in with my questions.
Yeah, so we started out, we had a couple quality sessions, had a good Fartlek on the Polichaski early in the week, and then those 3 really easy days. And then had a really good workout right after that. Legs are feeling really good on Saturday. Somehow ended up running my 3rd fastest time ever on the Polichaski, which I have like a bulletin board on my wall and I'm keeping track. I think I'm up to almost 60 at this point, times up the Polichaski. So 3rd fastest is good. Yeah. So it's been a good week.
Nice. Okay. All right. So let's get started here and drill in. Did you mention this was your first week with a recovery block in it? Can you tell me a little bit about what that means? So I mean, it seems kind of obvious at the surface level. You're giving yourself a little bit of an easier time. Why is that important? It's a big reduction. So how do you sort of manage that and stay patient and, keep your inner golden retriever in check?
Yeah. I think in general, and this goes back to I think our very first episode when we were talking about how I structure training on kind of a macro level, like a week and month scale. So normally in running, the standard is you do some amount of, we call it up weeks and down weeks. So the standard for kind of a high level runner is you might do 3 weeks up and then 1 week down. And the idea is you're allowing the body to recover both mentally and physically during that lower period, that lower week. And then you can do another 3 weeks up and you kind of create a sawtooth pattern where you go up, and then down, and then up, and then down. It keeps going like that. For me, I've found, and this is maybe another, don't take this as advice thing because this works for me, but I don't prescribe this for my athletes, is instead of doing 3 weeks at say 100% of volume and then 1 week at 75, I'll actually do 20 to 25 days, really high, super high volume. And then I'll take 3 days of almost complete rest for me. So that might be 30 to 60 minutes. And for me, that 3 days is shorter, but the huge drop in volume, I'm going from say 4 to 6 hours a day of training volume to half an hour to 1 hour. That short period, but really strong reduction in volume, that leaves me feeling super fresh. And then I'm able to go into that next, up cycle feeling really good. So I've been doing this for a really long time. I actually think I stole it from Renato Canova, who's one of the best coaches of the East African marathoners. And he was one of these early guys 10 or 15 years ago who would post all of his guys' training logs on the let'srun.com forums. Literally, he would just post them as a giant text block. It was incredible to me in college. And these are guys who are literally winning the Boston Marathon or setting world records and stuff. And he would just post their training, and people would go in and analyze it and look at it. And this is one of the things I noticed was they would have these 2 or 3 day, maybe 4 day periods where they're super low volume, especially after really big workouts, but they weren't taking full down weeks. And so I just started experimenting with this myself in college. And as the great Jon Waldron, my high school coach, says, training is very much an experiment of one, and it's about figuring out what works for you. So yeah, that's kind of why I do it. And then your second question was about sorry, repeat the second
How do
question,
you
part of the
stay
question?
patient given the
Oh,
vast difference in training and your general desire to be out running all the time?
yeah, I use that time to do other things. So again, going back to Jon Waldron, I remember talking to him about this, and he was like, "Yeah, it sounds like a good time to like read long Russian novels or something." And so now I usually use it more for like work, or in this case, it was a combination of, work with Chosky or my coaching, as well as it served well as a way for me to get my apartment really dialed and like do my last big shopping runs and set the place up the way I wanted and all that stuff. So I usually will ahead of time try and find like things that I can do that I've usually are the things that I've been procrastinating for a really long time. And then I'll be like, okay, I'm just going to basically work for 3 days nonstop. So sometimes I'll try to do something a little bit social in there too, but a lot of the time I'll just use it as an opportunity to catch up on something else in life. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's no scientific issues in terms of, has there been studies about like so it's not really a matter of I need to take a certain amount of time off for my muscles to get a certain way or anything. It's just really, I need to recharge and reset and give my body a little bit of time to recover, but there's no particular formula for it.
Again, it's kind of a experiment of one thing. I don't think that
Yep.
there's been any like big longitudinal studies of
Hmm.
this kind of macrocycle stuff. So there's just kind of like the conventional wisdom of like what everybody does. And then there's what I've done anecdotally on myself for a long time that's worked. And I've done the like take a whole down week thing as well. And to me, it doesn't make that much of a difference, I find, if you do that like 1 week at 75 versus 3 days at like 20% volume. And again, we talked about this in the context of doing double threshold, where to me it's about, okay, how much work can I fit into a block of time, whether that's 1 day or a 6 month season. And this way you're condensing your recovery period into a shorter amount of time. And as long as, like you say, as long as you're getting the same benefits, so you're starting the next block recovered and fresh, which I've found that does work for me. As long as that's happening, then it doesn't really matter whether it's 3 days of literally sitting on the couch or whether it's 7 days of, 50 to 75%, which is kind of the standard.
Okay. Got it. All right. So next, so Tuesday you did a double session.
Yep.
And I've been wanting to ask this for a long time because you use this term Fartlek, which I know now from having known even before we started this series is a Swedish word, I think. Is that right?
Allegedly. I mean, I've read
Swedish.
this
Yeah.
myself in like a million books and Runner's World articles
Okay.
and stuff.
But
I
anyway,
don't, yeah.
we don't know the root, but it's a common term in running. But it's a funny sounding word, Fartlek,
Yep.
particularly for US people. Um, so you did a fartlek in the morning and a treadmill in the afternoon. So talk to us a little bit about that, and then tell us where this term fartlek comes from and why it gets used in running, if you know, whatever you know about it.
Yeah. So fartlek, again, allegedly comes from the Swedish word, which means speed play. That's just what I've read a bunch of times. I don't know if it's actually true or not. But that's the idea, is it's essentially a slightly more relaxed form of interval training is how I would describe it. So interval training, I think of as you go to the track, you're doing 400s, you're doing 800s, you have a very specific pace you're trying to hit, you have a very specific rest period. Fartlek, the way that I use it, and again, people use these terms pretty much interchangeably, even the way that I'm using them. The way that I think of fartlek is it's basically I do a certain amount of time on, which is the work, the hard part, and then I do a certain amount of time off, and that's the recovery. So in this case, like on Tuesday, I did 3 minutes on, 1 minute off, and that 3 minutes is, more or less at tempo / like lactate threshold effort. So again, we're talking about 60-minute race pace effort. So 3 minutes at that pace, and then 1 minute really easy of just, recovery pace. So it's not standing still, but it's not recovery. But
Okay.
it's not going hard. So
Okay.
for me,
Got
fartlek
it.
is it's just basically another way to say interval training. But it's a little bit more relaxed, and especially when I'm doing uphill stuff where pace really doesn't matter, and even more so, the pace will vary during one session because it's up a mountain, so the terrain will vary, the altitude varies, all these things. So literally that stuff will change, and it's just like impossible to say, oh, run it at 10-minute mile pace or 5-minute mile pace, or even using the Kilometer pace, which we'll talk about some other episode, it still doesn't really work.
Yep. Okay. And then, so then just talk us through what the double session is like and how this fits into it.
Yeah. So these sessions that I'm doing right now and that I'll probably do for the next month or two, honestly, kind of came to me, and it's all built upon what I did when I was on the bike recovering from Achilles surgery. So like this buildup and last summer's buildup and last spring's buildup are all very, very similar in terms of the actual workouts that I'm doing, because last spring, or I guess winter really, like January, February, when I was on the bike and recovering, I got super fit on the bike, and I was like, well, that worked really well. And so in the spring, in the summer, when I started doing actual trail running training, I was like, you know what, I'm going to take all those workouts that I did on the bike, and I'm just going to do them on my feet and see how that goes. And it went super, super well. The summer was amazing, super fit. Fall was amazing. So now I'm just basically repurposing those with some really slight modifications. But if you look at my Strava or training logs or anything like that, you'll see, a lot of these workouts look really familiar. And the basic structure is these double sessions. In the morning, I'm doing a fartlek, there's that word again, with 1 minute recovery. It's always 1 minute recovery. I like to keep that nice and short, so it keeps the heart rate pretty elevated the whole time. And then the reps are at LT pace, and it's an extremely boring and simple idea, which is basically each week I add 1 minute to the on reps. So I did 3 minutes, then next week I'll do 4 minutes, and then I'll do 5 minutes. And obviously there'll be a little bit of mixing it up in there, but that's basically it. And then I'll go up to probably, longest one I'll do will probably be like 10 minutes on, 1 minute off, something like that. So that's always in the morning, and that's always on Polichowski, unless I'm like out of town or something. That's always on the same trail, so it's very comparable. And I have good benchmarks, good data, and it's just a really steep, hard trail, so it works out really well. And then in the afternoon, I'm almost always doing those on the treadmill. Part of that is just for control. I like to be able to control that afternoon workout a little bit to make sure it doesn't get out of control. And also because literally a lot of the time we get storms in the afternoon, like thunderstorms. And so it's just hit or miss as to whether you're going to get stuck in a storm up in the mountains. So a lot of the time I'm doing that at the gym. And then I'm hitting a slightly different energy system. So again, if you go back to Ty's jargon dictionary, which if you're new, tylercandrews.com/jargon, that's our dictionary. So in the morning is LT, which is 60-minute race pace, and in the afternoon is CV, which is critical velocity, which is 30-minute race pace. So those reps are a little bit shorter. The recovery is usually a little bit longer. So this week I did 45 seconds on, 75 seconds off. So it's like, the rest is longer than the work right now. But again, that will build up in a similar way to the morning sessions, where it'll go probably up to 3 or 4 minutes on at CV and then a minute or so of recovery. But that'll take a couple of months because that's really, really hard.
Okay. So one thing I notice is that you're pretty constantly comparing your times and your efforts to your prior block of training. So what's the point of that? I mean, I guess I sort of understand you're trying to compare yourself to some benchmark data. Let me verify that and let you explain it. And also, is there any downside to sort of those kinds of comparisons to yourself?
Yes, there's definitely downside. And I think there's also benefit. And for me, at least, I think the benefit generally outweighs the downside. So we talked about on one episode kind of my origin story and this idea of when I started getting into running, one of the things that was so addictive was being able to see, we raced 5K every single week in cross country in high school. And so every single week when I started taking it seriously, I was seeing my times get faster, even on different race courses. And that was super addictive to me. So partly it's that same idea of trying to build like mental momentum and just getting excited and seeing progress and stuff that's really quantifiable. Like I'm an engineer, you're an engineer, I have your brain to an extent. And I am a big fan of quantifiable things where I can see, hey, I ran Polichowski faster this week than I did last week. And because I train here regularly, I can even say I ran it faster this week than I did last year at this same time. So I can see progress both across my current buildup as well as like even from year to year, and I can get a very good sense of where I am. So that's the benefit. The downside is obviously, well, what happens if you have a bad workout and you don't run faster, right? Like, and that's very fair. And I think that just is kind of maturity, and it comes with the territory of recognizing that like you're going to have bad days. You're going to have a day where you have food poisoning or you don't sleep well or you get in a fight with your partner or whatever it is. And those things are impacting you as well. And I think another thing we've talked about before that is so important is this idea that no one workout defines you. It's about the trend. And so for me, that's really the positive thing about doing all these workouts in the same place is I can see the trend line. So even if there's one data point that's kind of off, that's, maybe it's a bad day, I can still see, oh, the general trend line is up. And that's the thing that's really important to me. So yeah, I try not to, again, I don't do what I coach. Like for my athletes, I almost never do this for them. I'll always make little adjustments so that they're not doing this because, most people aren't pro athletes and they can't go do the exact same, trail every single week. They have life commitments, they're moving, whatever. They're also just going to have more of that variability because the other things in their life are impacting their own training and racing more than mine might be. So I would not recommend this to most people. Unless you're super consistent, maybe you're running on a treadmill every day or something like that, where maybe that's a better example. But in general, I think for me, it works really well. But I think a lot of people, it can be a big problem because you will see a lot of variance, and it can be hard to separate the signal from the noise.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you're right that for most mere mortals, it's probably not a great plan because the variability is just too high with all the other factors in our lives. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Some level of comparison, I think, but I guess I should say some level of comparison is good. I mean, when you're coaching people, I assume they want to get better. You have to provide them with somewhat of telling that they're better, but not at such a granular level, right?
Right. And that's also where I, as the coach, come in and can say, hey, like this workout that we did this week, if we compare it to this other workout that you did 6 weeks ago, you ran twice as much volume with half the rest. And they might not even notice that, but that's where like having the coach comes in and can say, hey, look at this and this. And so it's almost like there's that point of comparison that's there if you want it and if you look for it, but it's not as automatic,
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. So you have your bike on the balcony in your new,
Yeah.
your new digs, and you've even called us from the phone there because you take long rides on the bike and you're bored, I guess. So
Yeah, pretty much.
looking for some stimulation while you're there. So talk us through where that fits. You mentioned a little earlier that the bike really helped you get fit after your your Achilles surgery, rather. So tell us a little bit more if there's more to it about how it fits into your training overall.
Yeah, so the bike here is different, I would say, than it was during the recovery from surgery, because then it was every workout I did was on the bike. I couldn't do anything else, right? Now I feel like the bike is giving me a really good opportunity to get basically just more low-end aerobic work, like that zone 1, zone 2 that everybody loves to talk about, without putting any like musculoskeletal stress on my body. So this, I think it was in our list of 16 things that started with "Don't get greedy," like that I have taped to my mirror now. And it goes into "Don't get greedy" because, okay, I could go do an extra, 5 or 6 hours a week of running or hiking, but objectively it's just a riskier activity. There's more likelihood of getting injured from an extra 5 or 6 hours of running or hiking versus sitting on my balcony and just spinning and, watching Netflix and talking to my friends and stuff. So, and again, it's me being a control freak. So I have a nice setup where I have a trainer. I can set the wattage, I can track my heart rate, I can keep it like exactly where I want. And then I can also save my legs a little bit. So then I can go harder in actual, on foot training while still getting more general aerobic volume. So yeah, that's really the idea. And it's honestly just super, super convenient. Like my apartment here has a balcony. I can see the mountains. I can watch the like sunset and the clouds roll in and stuff. And get some fresh air out there. So it's a really awesome setup, and I'm excited for it. And it's a nice way to chat with friends and catch up on bad TV and stuff.
Okay. So it's really about increasing volume at very, very low impact
Right.
on your
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would
Makes a lot
say
of sense.
like decent return and very low risk.
Yeah. Got it. All right. So the other thing that came up this week that's the first time I've read about was a lot of training in layers.
Yeah.
And I remember you've done this before in the past when you had to run in a hot place, but
Yep.
this is Project Himalaya. You're not going to run in a hot place.
No, it will
I
not
don't
be hot.
think.
That I promise.
So what's the point of the layers and how does that fit into your training?
So most of the layered stuff is either if I'm in the gym or on the bike. And it's basically I'm trying to increase cardiovascular load without increasing musculoskeletal strain. So it's basically a way to just raise my heart rate a little bit while letting my legs recover better. So
Okay.
if I'm in a tank top outside and it's 65 degrees, which it pretty much always is in keto, on the bike, I actually have to like work hard muscularly with my legs to like get my heart rate to the right zone. Like my legs are too strong, like make it like
Right,
it's a
right.
problem, you know? You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I know.
Whereas if it's like if you're in a sauna, right? If you're sitting in a sauna, your heart rate will just go up without doing anything. So if I'm wearing, a hoodie and a long sleeve shirt and some track pants or whatever, I can bike at very low wattage. So muscularly, my legs are not doing much at all, but the actual cardiovascular stimulus, again, I can get into that zone 1, zone 2, which is right where I want to be, but it's saving my legs a little bit because really I want my legs to be working mostly when I'm actually out and, hiking on the mountain or running on the mountain. So that's the idea is basically just getting the cardiovascular result without, putting any more stress on the legs. Like all this stuff, the extra stuff that I'm doing, I feel like that's really what it's all about. It's about not getting greedy with the overall stimulus and figuring out how can I just take, how can I get more work without putting more stress on my actual musculoskeletal system?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And that actually, there's some suggestion that's one of the reasons that saunas show very, very good data in terms of improving your health is they're literally a little bit like zone 1, zone 2. They just raise the heartbeat and do the other things that a raised heartbeat does inside your body. So yeah, interesting. Okay. So again, increased volume, lowered stress effectively.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So Saturday session, you mentioned this earlier, and this was part of what I was thinking about, was your third fastest ever on Polichowski. So what made it such a great day? What happened there? Because you weren't trying to be that fast,
No.
I don't think, right?
No, I mean, again, it was just the next workout in that progression. So like on Monday I did 3 minutes on, 1 minute off, and on Saturday I did 4 minutes on, 1 minute off. And I think my fastest time ever, I ran it as a race last year. They held a race on the route every year. And I ran under 50 minutes. So I think it was like 49:40. And then after that, I think my next couple of times were like in the 52 to 54 range in workouts last summer. So yeah, 53:45 was really, really, really good for me. I was super, super excited with that. I mean, again, given where I am early in the season, that's a really good place to be. So I was like, what made it go well? I mean, it was a good day. It was a fast day. It was a cool weather day, not too hot, not too wet. And I'm just fitter than I was last summer. I think that's the big takeaway that I've had from all of these. We talked about the not drawing too many conclusions from one data point and looking at trend lines. And I think it was last episode we talked about, I had that really good, 5 minutes on workout and was way ahead of where I was at the beginning of the last buildup. But it's still one thing. But now it's like, okay, now I have really 4 or 5 different points that are like, okay, the level is clearly a significant amount higher than it was last summer, at least at the beginning of the block. And even at the end of the block, because again, this is my third fastest time ever. And I've done this trail 50 or 60 times at this point. So I've done a lot of good pushes on it. So yeah, I think it's mostly just being fit, being excited. I mean, it was also the day after my recovery block ended, so that definitely helps. You get a little bit just more like bounce, a little bit more pop in the legs, a little bit less tired. But mostly, yeah, it's just being fit, which is really, that's a good place to be.
Yeah, great, great. So it really is just another indication that you have made that incremental progress up a little bit. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's look back for a second because you went through this one first block and a little bit of recovery. So so if you reflect on that, which knowing you, I'm sure you have, what stood out for you in this first block?
I think I was surprised actually looking at the numbers because I hadn't really looked at it as a 3 week block until this week, like after it was over and I was in my recovery block. So I was surprised by just how much training I'd managed to get in. You know, the first half of the month felt a little bit like whirlwind. You know, I was kind of still on vacation. Like we took that trip to Chile, we did a bunch of hiking, and like I was moving. Like, so there were all these things in my life that were not training related that I was, you know, they were awesome. It was super fun. But I was surprised. You know, I think I averaged almost 10,000 meters a week for those 3 weeks, which is quite a bit. And yeah, like 22 hours of training time. So some of that I think is, you know, it was very low intensity. It was with friends and stuff. But that's exactly where I'd want to start, is basically just a bunch of really easy volume. I think the vert number is definitely the thing that stood out to me as the most surprising and the best. I think having that much vert this early in the season while I was still kind of on vacation mode, it makes that transition into the kind of 12 to 15,000 meters a week, which is probably where I'll end up settling for probably the next month or so, probably the next 3 week block. If we look at that, it makes that jump a lot less intimidating, knowing that, oh, I just had 3 weeks at 10,000 meters a week. So going from 10,000 to 12 to 14, 15 doesn't seem so scary. So yeah, it's all good news. I don't know what, yeah, it's good. I feel like this is like too positive and I'm just like waiting for the other shoe to drive me in that a little bit. I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want to jinx it.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, indeed. Well, we all have that kind of feeling that it can't all be perfect, but
Yeah.
take what you can get, right? It's a
Yeah,
long
I'll take it.
way,
I'll take it for now.
long journey.
Stay
Okay.
patient.
Yeah. So that's good. Congratulations then.
Thank you.
In your Saturday workout, you did mention you needed to recalibrate your CV tolerance because you were struggling to get the right level of effort, I think, when you were in that workout. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So CV is an energy
Again,
system.
it's the
Yeah, it's
30-minute
critical
race pace,
velocity.
critical
So it's
velocity.
30-minute. Yeah. So that's like for a runner, maybe that's your 5 to 10K race pace. If you think about it like that. So it's not quite VO2 max pace, but it's faster than tempo pace. And for me, it's an energy system that I don't touch that much outside of when I'm in full training mode. So I really haven't hit that energy system in a few months. And CV, at least for me, is an interesting one because and the reason I said this in that specific workout, I remember it specifically, was I think I was doing sets of 6 reps or something, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll do 2, maybe I'll do 3, whatever. I'll figure it out. But point being, I got to the last set and I had thought, oh man, I don't even know if I'm going to get through this. And then in the last set, I actually had the ability to increase the pace quite a bit for those last few. And so what that says to me is I just need to kind of recalibrate my mind, my brain, my central governor, whatever it is that you call that part of you that kind of decides like when you get too tired mentally to deal with something. And especially in workouts where you have a lot of repetitions, which these are short reps, so there's a lot. And it's a little bit about just deciding, okay, this level of discomfort is okay, you know, and recognizing what that is, because I think I have that really well for the LT, the lactate threshold stuff, but for the shorter, faster stuff, I'm still kind of figuring that out where I'm like, oh God, this feels really bad, like really, really quickly into the workout. And then it's like, you can kind of, there's this expression in running that you can smell the barn, which means like you're almost done, you know, you're done with your run. You can smell the barn if you're finishing on a farm, I guess. And so it's like you
I
get to
guess.
that point where you can kind of smell the bar and you're in like the last couple of reps and you're like, oh, you know what? I actually have a lot of energy left. Like I could pick it up a little bit. So I wasn't actually as tired as I thought I was. So that's what I mean by recalibrate. And sometimes this is just the getting back into harder running at all. You have that. And that's why people talk about, rest busters with racing too, where you don't necessarily want to have your really important race be the first hard thing that you do in a long time, because sometimes you literally just forget what it feels like to be in a race and to have it feel really hard and still have 30 or 40 or 50% of the event left. So that's why you would go do something less important and kind of recalibrate that ability to tolerate discomfort a little bit. So yeah, that's specifically what I was talking about there, is just that idea of mentally tolerating where you are in the workout, how much you have left, how much energy you have left, how bad it really feels, how much you can tolerate, all those things. It's a fine calibration.
Yep. Yep. So your cognizance of your relative perceived effort, RPE, as they like to call it in the workout world in general,
Yep,
right, was a little off.
exactly.
Because you thought you were working really hard, and
Yep,
you were, but
yep,
what you couldn't tell was you could have worked even harder and kept it up, right?
exactly. Yep,
You have to recalibrate that. Well, where is my perceived exertion right to get me to the right level of training, the right
exactly.
energy system that I want to work on? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds really hard. So you have to just keep trying until you really understand where it's at. And of course, if you're getting fitter, you have to keep adjusting it, I assume. Is that right?
Yes, you do have to keep adjusting it. I think that there's also, as as the workouts get longer and the reps get longer, um, you just have this sense of, okay, if I could do last week's workout, then I know I can do this week's workout, right? And even if it's a little bit of a step up, you just kind of trust the process and trust that ability to go from this one to that one. And sometimes, like we talked about, you just have a bad workout and you can't quite, or a bad day, you're just off that day. You're a little bit more fatigued than you were last week. And sometimes that happens and then you just adjust it a little bit. But
Yep.
yeah, I think that ability to just recognize, oh my gosh, this feels so bad, but it's actually fine. Like I'm fine. This is fine. That's the important
Okay.
thing.
Okay. So, and then you're doing almost every day. It sounds like you're doing something up and down Ruku and
Hmm.
the Polochowski and a lot of similar routes. So there are some differentiation here and there in what you do, but a lot of it is very similar, partially, as you said, because it gives you benchmarking against what you've done before, but also I assume because you feel like that's the way you need to be training. But it just strikes me as, wow, man, that's really boring after a while. So how do you deal with that and stay engaged? And when you're doing a lot of the same things over and over and over, and you're doing a lot of them for a long time, hours and hours a day, right?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is it's my job and I get paid to exercise, which is awesome. That is a
Okay.
tremendous
Yeah,
privilege.
that's
And,
true. Yep.
I do a lot of things, like sitting on the stationary bike is not that fun either, but I do it because I know that it's the thing that I need to do that will prepare me the best for like being the best in the world at what I'm trying to do. So, you
Yep.
know, I think there's people look at pro athletes, especially pro runners, I think because it's such an approachable sport where so many people run and then they see pro runners as, oh, they're just better at this thing than I am. Um, and so they assume that they have the same kind of attitude, which is true. Like I love running and I love going out and exploring new places and running new trails and doing all kinds of different stuff. But I also recognize that when I have a really important goal that I'm working towards, I know at this point I have a really good sense of what I need to do to prepare for that. And yeah, it just depends on the situation here in Quito, especially. I love that trail. It's great. Like I honestly don't get bored of it. And I know that it gets me super, super fit during that every day. So it's worth it to me to, drive 20 minutes over there. I have this beautiful forest right out my back door, basically. And honestly, I mostly just go for walks in there with friends and, some short, easy runs because like it's just not steep enough. Like there's not like 2,000 meter climb in that forest. So, when I was training for UTMB Keto, which is much more of like a trail running rolly race, I was doing a lot more over there. But here, I'm training for an uphill event, Project
Yep.
Himalaya, and I need to be really good at going uphill. And
You
so
need the
I
vert.
go uphill a lot. Yeah, I need the vert, and
Yep.
it's the place to get the vert. So yeah,
Yep.
I think part of it is just approaching it with that mindset of like literally I think about it like, okay, I'm just going to my office every day, and my office rules. Like my office is me getting to like go through this incredibly beautiful forest and look at all these beautiful mountains around me, and see the city from above, and watch the bunnies and birds chirp and all this amazing stuff. And I get to sweat, and I get to listen to audiobooks or music or whatever I want, or just be in my own head. Like that's my office, and it's amazing. So, to me, it's a small price to say, oh, well, it's the same place, but also I really don't mind it. Like I love it. It's such a beautiful trail. And every time I go up, it's a little bit different. The light's a little different. The experience, the effort, I'll see different people, different animals, things like
Yeah.
that. So I love it. Yeah. I honestly don't get bored. I mean, I've been here for almost a month at this point, and I've probably gone up it 15 times already, and not bored.
Well, that's awesome. It's always great when you love your work. And it
Yeah,
does
for
sound
sure.
really fantastic just in terms of being out and I mean, I think you're making you're what's the word, downplaying a little bit how much effort's involved and how much attention you have to pay, but that's, you say, that's just the work part of it. But at least the work
Right.
is in a beautiful spot where you
Yeah,
have a lot of autonomy over it and all that kind of good stuff.
very
Great.
much. Yep.
Yeah. That was my set of questions from this workout. So give us a little teaser for next week and anything else you want to add or excited about.
Yeah, I mean, this is the start of the next block. I think this is the first real block of training as I think about it, because that initial, January block, half of that time, like I said before, I was kind of on vacation. So I think this is the one where it's going to get pretty hard at some point. I'll go back to David Foster Wallace again, and there's a great analogy in there where so there's a lot of stuff in that book about sports, and there's also a lot of stuff about addiction and addiction recovery.
Infinite
And I think
Jest you're talking
this,
about?
sorry, yeah, this is
Or
an infinite jest, yeah.
yeah. Okay.
And there's this really beautiful metaphor where this woman is talking about, one of the main characters talking about addiction recovery, and she's talking about this idea of looking out at like all the days ahead of you of being sober, and she's picturing it as Evil Knievel, like the stunt guy who like would do crazy stuff. And it's like Evil Knievel,
Yep.
like jumping over a bunch of school buses on a motorcycle. And it's like, you look out and it's just like, there's all these school buses. It just goes school buses forever. And, you know, this goes back to the whole thing with addiction and recovery, and people, to take it one step at a time, take it one day at a time. And I think for me, I think about that a lot with regards to endurance sport, both in competitions, literally of thinking it as a step at a time or a mile at a time or whatever, as well as in these blocks of really, really heavy training where sometimes I will get incredibly fatigued early in a big block, and thinking about, oh my gosh, I have another 17 days until I get like a little recovery window, can be really daunting. But if I'm just, okay, I'm in my routine and I'm just going to do what I need to do tomorrow, that's all I need to focus on. I know I'm going to feel better at some point. It'll be fine. But that ability to just not look too far ahead, just look one day at a time, I find that really helpful. So, and all that to say, I'm actually really excited about that, because that's like the part of training that I find really engaging, is when it gets hard and how you deal with that. So yeah, I'm really excited for that. I'm excited to keep doing some workouts. I might actually go for my first FKT of the year, maybe as early as next weekend. I've got a workout, or I had on my calendar, a longer single / fartlek workout, and I might do that and just try and go for the FKT on Ruku itself and go all the way to the summit pretty quickly. So far, all I've been doing is the Polichowski, which takes you up basically the first half of the mountain, the first 1,100 meters. So all the way to the summit is about 2,000 meters. So that's one exciting thing to look forward to next week, but that'll be kind of a game time decision, not trying to get greedy. We'll see how everything goes. And yeah, if it goes well, maybe we'll see something. Well, we will have something actually exciting to talk about next week.
Okay. I hope so. Okay. For our cool down this week, we're going to talk a little bit about mental training, which is an important part, and I think an underrated part of all of life, but especially sports. And I think it's particularly underrated in endurance sports because people think, well, I just go out there and run. What's the big deal? So let's talk about this a little bit. So you talk a lot, Ty, about mind and body, how they're linked. So in endurance sport in particularly, do you see more focus on the mental side, the physical side, some combination of somewhat equal? How do you think about it?
I think endurance sport especially is more of a mental sport than maybe a skill sport. I don't know. I think all sports are really mental. And endurance sport, though, the thing is with especially what I do in terms of really long stuff is you have a lot of time in your own head. And you have a lot of time in your own head where, in theory, things shouldn't feel that bad. Like if you're doing something that's going to take you 10 or 20 hours, you're going to have some of that time that's going to feel pretty fine. And so you're almost going to be bored. And so it's really important to understand how your mind can work in a situation like that, and also be able to not control it, but just recognize what's going on, if there are patterns that are good or bad, and work with those and adjust accordingly. So yeah, I think that for me, the mental side of sport is something that I think about almost as much as the physical side, because I've seen time and time again how much a really strong mind can allow me to do things that I thought were completely not possible. And conversely, how if I'm in a really bad headspace, I literally lose the ability to do even the most absolute basic things, like jogging, literally. I've had things like that where I literally run 5 minutes and I'm just like walking home because I'm in such a bad headspace. So with mind as body, I think you see the relationship between those two things so clearly. And I've done this long enough that I've seen it in myself and I've seen it in other people, whether that's amateur athletes, professional athletes, where, you just see it all the time of people who are just able to pull off something that you're just, how did they do that? Like that shouldn't be possible, but then you're like, oh, that guy he's a little bit crazy. Like I was actually just watching, this stand-up last night with this guy, Neil Brennan, who used to write for Dave Chappelle. He's really funny. And he was doing a bit about this exact idea of how he was like teasing about how like everybody's getting soft about mental health, and ESPN was like doing this thing about mental health of athletes. He's like, no, we shouldn't do that. Our athletes need to be crazy. Like that's why they're so good. Like you ever met Michael Phelps? That guy's crazy. And I think there's a lot of truth in that like, obviously, yes, it's tongue in cheek, and there are important mental health things to consider with athletics, but also there is definitely something that I've seen in really high level athletes that I've gotten to know personally, like Jim Wamsley, where I'm like, wow, that guy's got something upstairs that is not normal. And that's part of what makes him an incredible athlete. Like it's not even a bad thing. It's just like, he's got a fire and a motivation that comes from somewhere. So anyways, it's a very long-winded way of saying, yes, like the mind, I think, can accomplish incredible things in conjunction, obviously, with the physical side of training. And I think it can also be a huge impediment if you don't take care of it or know how to work with your mind.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I never really thought about it because, I'm a big tennis and golf person, and both of those sports, most of the time is not actually playing the sport, right? Most of the time is thought, and golf, I think even more so, because in most sports, as with tennis, something's happening to you and you have to respond. If you're playing basketball or football or baseball or soccer or whatever, something's hitting, somebody's aiming a ball at you or trying to get by you or do something, and you don't really have that much time to think, and the action is generally pretty fast. Whereas with both endurance running and with golf, it's just you. You're playing the course. You're not playing. I mean, if you're at a race, there's a little bit of other people in the race, So there's a little bit more of that in it. But in an endurance race, often even then, I remember certainly with you, you're
Yeah,
by yourself a lot. You're long ways from other people. And
exactly.
so most of the time you're sort of in your own mind. And that, I don't know if it's, the joke in golf is that if we talk to anybody else the way we talk to ourselves, man, they would never talk to us again, right?
Yep.
But I think that has more to do with skill sports and how difficult golf is as a sport, particularly for amateurs. But it certainly has that same feeling of, wow, you really have to work on the mental side of it. And I never thought about an endurance run that way, where it's so long that most of the time you're just kind of cruising along. And so you've got to keep that mental focus, which is really, really hard, especially over those kinds of time frames, hours and hours at a time. It's amazing. So I will genuflect in your direction
Oh,
because
no.
now I have a whole nother level of respect for you and Jim Wombley and all these people who do these incredibly long, challenging races on top of all the just the physical challenge. I never really thought about it. So wow,
But I think
amazing.
you could make the argument because like I think about this, I have no idea how, someone who's a golfer or in my world in track and field, someone who runs the 100 meters or throws the shot put, those guys are training for years to run at the Olympics, say, and then their race is 9.5 seconds, and it's
Yep.
like if you mess up one step in 100, if you have a bad start for the first 0.3 seconds of the race, your race is over. Like that's it.
Yep.
And so, yes, it's with on the ultra side or even the marathon, you have a long time in your own head, but also like you have time to like make mistakes and come back.
Yep.
Whereas there's so much pressure on those power and skill things, whether again, it's like hitting a golf, like how much time do you actually spend swinging a golf club in a round of golf? It's probably like a couple minutes, right? So it's like, even that, it's so little
Yep.
time compared to
Yep.
how long you're training for it.
Yep. And one shot can mean the difference, can make all
Exactly.
the difference, certainly.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I think that I think sport we've talked about before is like it's designed kind of for this, that it tests physical and mental um, things. Like that's why sport is interesting, is because
Absolutely.
it's really hard no matter what it is, whether you're running 100 miles or you're running 60 meters. Like they're both really challenging in their own way, both mentally and physically.
Yep. And the mental part is just as important or more important perhaps even than the physical part. And so the person who gets better at the mental part also generally does better. I don't want to diminish physical talents and things because
Yeah.
I think, whoever you want to pick, Usain Bolt, okay. He just better than everybody else. He worked
Oh
hard.
yeah,
Michael
yeah.
Jordan, they have so much talent, but then they exploit that talent and they work on the mental side as well and they put it all together. It's just amazing. Okay.
Yep.
Do you do anything specifically that you do to help yourself mentally, to train, to
Yeah, I mean, I think every day I try to do things that help me train my mind. And part of it is I think that overall, your relationship with your mind overall will be directly correlative to how well your mind performs under duress in sports, right? If you're, I'll use myself as an example. Like I've had times where I've been going through something really hard. I had a really hard breakup in 2020 at the beginning of COVID. And that was a time where I was in a really bad headspace for a long time. And my performance suffered tremendously because I couldn't separate those things. I couldn't compartmentalize what I was trying to do in training from all these emotions and negative self-talk and all these things that are just classic, red flags of things you really don't want to do in sports. Be beating yourself up and, you know, thinking about really sad, bad things. Like that's not something that you want to be doing. And so I think having a healthy general sense of self and mental health is one of the most important. So like that's like a lot of what I do is, I do meditate. I know you and mom do as well, which is great. And I think just being able to, um, be quiet and listen to your thoughts and recognize them as thoughts. This is a classic cognitive behavioral therapy thing that I learned from my godmother, Donna, actually, is basically seeing thoughts and ideas in your head and just seeing them and not trying to get rid of them or react to them, but just seeing them and saying, okay, that's a thought and that's a feeling, and just acknowledging it and then recognizing that, okay, it's going to go away. So, if I'm out at, in training and something feels really hard or my splits are off, it's okay. Like, instead of reacting, let me say it a different way. I still might have that initial negative reaction of, oh no, I suck. Why am I running so poorly? But instead of letting that turn into this negative spiral of I'm terrible and now I'm in a bad headspace and now my workout is going to go worse because I'm in a bad headspace, it's just seeing that as, oh, that's a thought, that's a reaction, and I'm just going to let it go, and it's going to float off like a cloud, and that's okay. And I think recognizing what in life we can and can't control is a really big part of that for me. So like, I think about this literally every day. Like, if I'm in line at the grocery store and I'm really cranky because the line is really long, I recognize that as, okay, I'm feeling cranky. Here's the thought, like, that's me being cranky. Okay. Like, I can either accept that I'm going to be in this line for a while and it's fine and it really doesn't matter that much, or I can get all pissed off and annoyed about it and let it ruin my day. And so I think there's little ways like that you can just kind of improve your overall mental health that will also improve your endurance running or training or whatever it is that you're trying to do, that for me are, there's so much crossover. So I think about it more of just like, how do I become a happier, more fulfilled person in general? And then those things tend to work well in sport as well.
Yeah. Excellent. So as my friend Jim Galway said it, and others have said this many times, but he was one of the first, I think, who said it about sports: non-judgmental observation,
Exactly.
awareness, right?
Yep. Awareness.
Raising awareness, but eliminating judgment.
Exactly.
He used to have a great one-liner: awareness is curative.
I like that.
So
yeah.
just, see the thoughts, but don't let the thoughts. If you're nervous, where is the nervousness? How do you feel the nervousness? Don't try to
Exactly.
get rid of it. Just try to be aware of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any specific little tactics or tricks for getting through really tough moments?
Yeah, this is actually like one of the most common questions I get from strangers when they find out what I do. If I'm like talking to someone on an airplane or something, they're like, "Oh, like what are your like mental tricks or tips or whatever?" And I think the answer that I always give, and is true, is about compartmentalization. So it's basically, we kind of talked about it before with the infinite jest analogy, and it's this idea of just breaking things down into manageable pieces. So I think one of my superpowers is this ability to essentially like lie to myself. Like, I call it self-deception, and it's basically, I can, if I'm, so let's say you're in a hard, well, I'll use the first person. Let's say I'm in a really hard race or training session, and, I'm going up Polichowski and I'm doing 10 5-minute reps or whatever. And I get through 2 and I just feel, oh, I'm so tired. I can't do 8 more of these. I will literally lie to myself and just say, you know what? You don't have to do 8 more. Just do 1 more. And then we'll call it a day. We'll jog down. We'll go home with our tail between our legs. It's fine. And so I'll do 1 more, and then I'll be like, you know what? Okay, well, now we're at 3. Like, might as well do 4. 4 is like a more round number. Like, okay, let's do. And so it's literally this like ability to take my kind of conscious and subconscious, and like, I know that I'm gonna do it, but it's just this way of talking myself through it with positive. Like, it's not even positive self-talk. It's just reframing and breaking it down into things that feel manageable. So again, it's the same idea as we were
Staying in
talking
the
about.
present might be another way.
Exactly.
You're just trying to force yourself
Staying
back
in
into the present and not worry about the big task in front of you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're not looking too far ahead. You're not thinking too much about what you've already done. You're just, okay, can I do 1 more 5-minute rep? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I guess I can, so I should probably do it. And even then, even you can break it down even farther and say, in that rep, maybe you get to 2 minutes. You're like, God, I don't think I could get through this rep. Okay, I'll just do 1 more minute. And then you get to 3 minutes. Okay, I'll get to 4 minutes. Okay, now I'm almost done. I'll get to 5 minutes, So it's just, you can use this same compartmentalization on almost any scale, whether it's literally from months of, okay, I need to be able to do this thing in 6 months from now. That's this race that I really care about. And it seems totally impossible and I don't know how I'll get there, but just, I'm going to do the little steps one day at a time, to in a single repetition of, when the race or the workout gets really hard, and just finding little landmarks, whether it's time or literally like I'm going to run to that light pole and then I'll reevaluate. I'm not going to make any decisions until I get to that light pole, and then I get to the light pole.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm going to run to that tree. And literally I've run races like that where it gets so hard and you're just, okay, I need to take 10 more steps. Like I actually do a lot of counting. And that's another thing I'll talk about with tricks and exercise, like mental tricks, is I will literally count breaths. I'll count steps, things like that. And especially when we start talking about really big mountain stuff like 8,000 meters, where it's so much just about tolerating discomfort, that I will literally just count. I'll say, okay, I'm going to take 4 more steps. Literally, that's the level of granularity that we're talking about. I'll take 4 more steps, and I'm going to take some deep breaths, and I'm going to take 4 more steps again. Like that's the level of how much we're breaking it down.
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe I learned this from you, because when I've done what they call like Tabathas or any kind of VO2 max training, so you're doing, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it is, really hard, right? You're trying to
Mm-hmm.
get pretty much up to, 85, 90% of your max heart rate. And, that it's supposed to feel really hard. And I very much try and do that. I will count, okay, can I count 30 seconds off, to get through the
Yep.
next 30 seconds? Can I, watch the TV or read or whatever I'm trying to do to distract myself? Can I time out how long can I do that before I look at the clock again to see how close I am to the end of this cycle? Because it's just brutal. You're trying to push yourself pretty hard, and you're just doing it at a whole nother level. But I think maybe I caught that from you.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a good trick is break it down into the smallest chunk you can, count off
Yep.
time, count off steps, count off anything you can,
Yep.
to just try and say, okay, I'm just going to keep doing this for a little while longer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Great. All right. So in the spirit of everything on the internet, we have to ask, so when has your mind really gone south on you, and when has it really helped?
I think that the example I kind of mentioned before back in 2020, I think that was the time where I was in the worst personal headspace and it impacted my training the most. And that was more, like life and long term than, I can remember a few days where literally I had let's say like a 20 something mile long run, and I would go out and jog for 5 minutes and be like, I can't do this. And then I'd just like walk home. And like that for me as an athlete is so antithetical to how I had been for so long, where just no matter what, I would just get the work done. And it was the first time that I really experienced that, of just being so down on myself that I just couldn't do it. And it really wasn't until I dealt with myself and my personal issues outside of running that I was able to get back to where I wanted to be. And that was a months long process. That's not something that happens quickly. So I think that's definitely the hardest I've ever felt I've had to deal with my own mind. And then I think a really good example of things going well and that idea of compartmentalization is actually when I went to Kilimanjaro. So that was early 2023. And I'll try and make this a long story short. It was a complete shit show. Like the whole experience, everything about it was a disaster. In terms of like the week leading up to it, I was there with some friends, and there were some personal issues in that group that were not cool. And the mountain itself, we had to hire a logistics company that we'd never worked with before. And it was a complete disaster with them. Like they overpromised and underdelivered, and we were like sleeping outside with no food and like all this stuff. It was just like crazy. And literally the day of the FKT, I didn't know if I was even going to be allowed back in the national park. Like that's the level of craziness that we were talking about. And I remember like just being so unbelievably stressed out that week, and walking through the gate of the national park at like 2:00 in the morning and getting signed in. And then it was like, okay, well, that was the hard part. Now I just get to run up the mountain and back, and that it was, I think, maybe the best example in my entire life of going from unbelievably stressed out to just pure focus on a really hard task at hand and just completely blocking out everything else and just enjoying it, working really hard, staying super focused. Like I got the record. It was great. And I just I never thought about that. Like as soon as I started my watch, it was like all that stuff was gone, and I think that, it's not like that's the thing I'm most proud of in my whole life, but I think that ability to block out all of that bullshit, like that's probably the most extreme version of that I've ever seen.
Yes, I remember you talking to us a little bit about some of that stuff when you were doing it and all the craziness, particularly with the logistics company and stuff. So congratulations, and
Thanks.
it is something to be proud of.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share in terms of practices and recommendations you can make that might help me or others who are listening in?
I think actionable stuff. Yeah. I think the two things I would say are for general life health. I think doing a 10 to 15 minute meditation practice like every day, if you can do it 5 days a week, is incredible. There's so many good free apps nowadays with guided meditation. It really does make a big difference. I would say that would be my number one recommendation for general life stuff, and that will have a positive impact on your mental ability in sport as well. And I think for really sport specific stuff, what we talked about before with counting, I think counting is I use it all the time. If you're doing something hard, find something to count, whether it's steps, breaths, whatever, and use that as a way to get through those moments of saying, okay, I can do this for 20 more seconds, and then count to 20, and then do it again and do it again. So yeah, those would be my two kind of takeaways if we're trying to leave people with something, actionable they can take for themselves.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Tyler, for another great week.
Excellent. No, thank you. It's been great. Yeah, I will read us out here. So thank you, everybody. Please send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, ty@chosky.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. Remember, you can also read my raw training logs. Those are a lot more technical over on my blog at tylercandrews.com, and get that delivered to your inbox via Substack at tylercandrews.substack.com. Ty's Training is a Chosky Media production and brought to you by Chosky Endurance Collective, the world's leader in online coaching, travel, and community for endurance athletes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Ciao.